I want to ask you something before you decide if this message is for you. Don't switch videos yet, because what you are about to hear could explain the exhaustion you've been feeling for years. Maybe you aren't exhausted because you work too hard. Maybe you are exhausted because you've spent too long chasing things that were never designed to give you peace. You chase recognition, you chase love, you chase opportunities, you chase answers, you chase a future that doesn't exist yet, and while you run after all that, the only person being left behind is you. There is a paradox that very few people understand. The more desperately you try to hold on to something, the more strength you give it to drift away from your life. Because desperation is never born from abundance, it is born from fear. And fear has a silent way of convincing you that if you stop running for even an instant, you will lose what you desire most. But today I want to challenge that lie. What if the problem isn't that God is taking too long? What if the problem is that you never stop long enough to realize He is already preparing the way? Because while you try to pry doors open with your own hands, God is often closing the ones that would have destroyed the purpose you were created for. Listen closely to what I'm about to tell you, because it can change the way you live from this day forward. The most fulfilled people I have ever known weren't the ones running the fastest, they were the ones walking with the most peace. They didn't live desperate to prove their worth because they already knew who they were. They didn't chase the world's approval because they had found an identity that no applause could increase and no rejection could diminish. They discovered that true abundance doesn't begin when you get more things. It begins when you stop living in fear of losing them. Perhaps you spent years believing you need to try harder, control more, and pursue more, but maybe the only thing you need is to learn to let go, because there are blessings that don't arrive when you run after them. They arrive when your heart finally stops running ahead of God and decides to walk by His side. Today, I am not here to teach you how to chase your dreams. I am here to show you why. When you learn to relax, to trust, and to become the right person, life stops being a chase and begins to become an encounter. Because the greatest miracle happens when you stop desperately chasing what you thought you needed and discover that God was already preparing something infinitely better than you had ever imagined. I want you to be completely honest with yourself today. How many times have you chased after a person, an opportunity, a dream, or recognition, believing that if you didn't reach it immediately, your life would lose its meaning? I lived that way for a long time too. I thought I had to pick up the pace so things wouldn't slip through my fingers. I believed success belonged to those who ran the fastest and that happiness depended on getting what I longed for as soon as possible. But I discovered a truth that transformed my life. Everything you pursue out of desperation ends up moving away, because anxiety always communicates scarcity and fear can never build what only peace can sustain. Desperation has a silent way of governing the heart. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it disguises itself as productivity, commitment, or effort. It makes you believe that you must control every detail, convince every person, and open every door with your own strength. Without realizing it, you begin to live exhausted because fear never rests. It always makes you think that something is still missing for you to feel complete. That was how I understood that it wasn't the world that was stealing my peace. It was my constant need to pursue what I believed was essential to be happy. I remember a time when one opportunity seemed to define my entire future. I made plans, imagined scenarios, and placed overly high expectations upon it. Every day I thought about how to get it. My mind never rested. I prayed, yes, but I was actually still trying to control the outcome until one morning I realized I wasn't trusting in God anymore. I was trusting only in my anxiety. That day, I took a pause and asked myself sincerely, am I acting from a place of peace or from fear? The answer was obvious. Everything I was doing was born from the fear of losing, not from trusting God's purpose and God's purpose. From that moment on, I decided to change my approach. I stopped investing all my energy into chasing what I couldn't control and began investing it in building what did depend on me. I strengthened my character, deepened my relationship with God, cared for my discipline, and kept preparing, even though I didn't see results yet. Little by little, something extraordinary happened. I stopped living with the feeling of scarcity and started experiencing an abundance that didn't depend on circumstances. I understood that a person at peace doesn't stop working, they simply stop running, driven by fear. Today I want to invite you to do exactly the same. Every time you feel that urgency to obtain something immediately, stop for a few minutes and ask yourself a question that can change the course of your life. Am I acting from a place of peace or from fear? If you discover that fear is making decisions for you, stop moving forward until you regain your serenity. Because decisions born of anxiety often build chains, while decisions born of peace build freedom. Because whatever God has prepared for you will never require you to sacrifice your peace to reach it. After discovering that desperation only feeds fear and drives us away from peace, I understood another truth that completely changed my way of living. For a long time, I confused calmness with passivity. I thought that if I stopped running, I would be left behind. I believed that relaxing meant settling, giving up, or abandoning my dreams. We live in a world that applauds constant movement, even if that movement often has no direction. We are taught that the person who is always busy is the one who is advancing the most. But experience taught me that you can run for years and end up in exactly the same place if you run driven by fear instead of walking guided by purpose. I understood that relaxing does not mean surrendering. It means stopping the fight against God's timing to begin working on the person He wants to form within you. There is a huge difference between waiting with your arms crossed and waiting while building. True calmness is never inactivity. It is an active confidence that works in silence while others live desperately seeking immediate results. It is the ability to sow every single day, even if you cannot yet see the harvest. It is rising with discipline even when circumstances seem to change. It is believing that every small effort makes sense because God never wastes a season of preparation. I remember a time when I wanted everything to happen much faster. I looked at people who seemed to advance with ease and began to question my own process, and I wondered if I was doing something wrong or if I had simply arrived too late. One day, while praying, I understood something I will never forget. God was not delaying my destiny. He was strengthening my capacity to sustain it. That revelation transformed my anxiety into responsibility. I stopped obsessing over the speed of the results and started focusing on the quality of my preparation. Since then, I adopted a commitment that remains part of my life. Every day, I dedicate at least an hour to improving a skill, even if no one sees it and even if there are no visible rewards yet. There are days when I study, others when I read, practice, write, or invest time in strengthening my relationship with God. Some days seem to produce no immediate change, but I learned that discipline works like a seed. It does not break the soil the same day you plant it, but that does not mean it is not growing. Every silent act of preparation is building a stronger, wiser, and more mature version of who you will be tomorrow. Most people give up too soon because they measure their progress solely by what they can see. However, the deepest transformations always begin in the invisible. Roots grow before the fruit. Character is strengthened before recognition. Patience matures before opportunities. When you understand this, you stop living in despair to arrive and begin to enjoy the privilege of becoming the person the future will need. Today, I want to invite you to change your focus. Instead of asking yourself why what you are waiting for hasn't arrived, ask yourself what you can learn and develop while it is on its way. Dedicate 1 hour each day to building something within you. Improve a skill, strengthen your discipline, feed your mind, and nurture your spirit. Perhaps the result is not yet visible, but every minute invested in your growth is preparing the ground for what God is already preparing for you. Because stillness never stops the purpose. It simply gives it the time necessary to grow with roots strong enough to last a lifetime. After understanding that stillness does not mean stopping, but rather preparing with confidence, I reached one of the deepest battles every human being must face. It was not a fight against circumstances, but against the constant need to feel chosen by others. For many years, I believed my value increased when someone accepted me and decreased when someone rejected me. Without realizing it, I handed over the price of my identity to people who changed their minds based on their mood. I lived waiting for approval, recognition, and validation. Every applause made me feel important. But every criticism had the power to destroy my peace until I understood the truth God had been trying to teach me for a long time. Your value can never depend on being chosen by others, because that which needs constant approval ends up turning its identity into a negotiable currency. I remember a stage in which I did too many things seeking acceptance. I wanted to please, convince, and prove that I was enough. I said yes when I really wanted to say no. I accepted commitments that drained my energy for fear of disappointing someone. I measured my success by the number of people who approved of my decisions, but the more I tried to satisfy everyone's expectations, the more I drifted from the person I was truly called to be. I discovered that living in search of approval is an elegant prison. From the outside, it looks like humility, but inside it is emotional dependence. The problem is not wanting to be loved. The problem is believing that you only have value when others decide to acknowledge it. That was when I understood that true self-esteem isn't built on applause, but on character, principles, and purpose. God did not design my identity to change based on the world's opinion. My identity was meant to rest in the truth of who I am before Him. That day I stopped asking so often what others thought of me and started asking myself if I was living according to the values I wanted to represent. That simple decision began to restore a freedom I had lost for years. Since then, I adopted a practice that transformed the way I start every morning. Before looking at my phone, before checking messages or seeking signs of acceptance, I write down 3 qualities that exist in me, even if no one applauds them. I remind myself that I can be honorable even if no one notices, generous even if no one thanks me, and faithful to my principles even if no one celebrates it. That exercise seems simple, but it strengthens the heart in an extraordinary way. Little by little, you stop looking for your identity in the reactions of others and start finding it in the person you are building every day. I discovered that when a person knows their true worth, they stop competing for a place in the lives of those who don't know how to appreciate them. They no longer need to constantly prove who they are because their character speaks before their words do. They stop chasing acceptance and start living with coherence. That inner peace inspires much more respect than any desperate attempt to please. Today I want to invite you to break that silent chain. Do not allow the shifting opinion of people to determine the price of your identity. Build a self-esteem that remains firm even when there is no applause. Every morning, remind yourself who you are. Not because of what the world says, but because of the principles you choose to live by and the purpose God planted in your heart. Because when you discover that your worth never depended on being chosen by others, you stop begging for acceptance and start walking with the dignity of someone who already knows who they are. After understanding that your value doesn't depend on being chosen by others, I discovered a truth that finally strengthened my inner freedom. I understood that it's not enough to stop seeking approval. You must also stop reacting to everything that tries to steal it from you. For a long time, I thought that keeping silent was a sign of weakness. I believed that every criticism demanded a response, that every attack needed a defense, and that everyone who spoke about me deserved an explanation. I lived convinced that if I didn't respond, others would interpret my silence as a defeat. But life, and above all God, taught me something completely different. Silence is also a powerful response, not because you ignore reality, but because you decide that your peace is worth more than the need to have the last word. I remember a time when any negative comment was enough to ruin my entire day. A mean-spirited message, an unfair criticism, or a disdainful word was enough for my mind to start preparing arguments. I would spend hours imagining conversations that never took place. I rehearsed brilliant retorts to prove that I was right. Meanwhile, my purpose remained at a standstill because all my energy was focused on a battle that would never produce growth. It was then that I understood that many people are not looking to understand you, they are looking to provoke a reaction. I discovered that the ego feeds on conflict while purpose flourishes in serenity. One day, after receiving criticism I felt was deeply unfair, I felt the urge to respond immediately. I had the words ready, and my reasons seemed sufficient to defend myself. However, before acting, I remembered a question that began to change my way of living. Would this response actually build anything? I closed my phone, went for a walk, and decided to wait. During that hour of silence, my emotions began to calm down. What initially seemed like an essential conversation ended up revealing itself as a completely unnecessary argument. Upon returning, I no longer had the same desire to respond. I understood that time often doesn't change circumstances, but it does transform the heart from which we choose to act. Since that day, I adopted a simple but deeply powerful discipline. Every time someone tries to provoke me, I refuse to respond impulsively. I wait, I pray, I breathe. I allow calm to return to the place where emotion previously ruled. Not because I want to avoid important conflicts, but because I learned that decisions made out of anger almost always leave wounds that reason would never have caused. Silence has taught me that not all battles are worth fighting. Some only exist to distract you from the purpose that God has placed before you. Over time, I discovered that truly strong people are not those who respond to everything, but those who know how to choose carefully where to invest their energy. Peace is a resource too valuable to give away to just any discussion. There are conversations that build up and others that only feed pride. There are criticisms that help you grow and others that only seek to hurt. Wisdom consists of recognizing the difference and having the humility to step back when conflict stops producing life. Today I want to invite you to practice this principle whenever you face a provocation. Before you respond, wait an hour and ask yourself honestly, will what I am about to say build something, or will it only feed my ego? You will discover that many storms disappear when you stop feeding them with your attention. Because silence does not always mean that you have nothing to say. Often it means you have learned to value your peace too much to waste it trying to convince someone who has already decided not to listen. After discovering that silence can protect your peace much better than 1,000 arguments, I understood another truth that completely transformed how I pursue my dreams. For years, I thought the key to changing my life was to find the right opportunity. I believed that if I met the right person, arrived at the perfect place, or if the long-awaited occasion appeared, everything would change in an instant. I lived constantly looking outward, waiting for something to happen. But one day I realized that true abundance never begins with an opportunity, it begins with an internal transformation. You do not attract only what you desire, you attract what you are truly prepared for. That revelation forced me to ask an uncomfortable question. If exactly what I have been asking God for arrived today, would I be able to sustain it without losing my essence? The answer was not always what I wanted to hear. I discovered that I often asked for greater responsibilities without having yet developed the discipline necessary to manage them. I wanted influence without sufficient character. I desired growth without having first learned to be faithful in the small things. I expected great blessings while neglecting the habits that could prepare me to receive them. That was when I understood that God is not only interested in giving you more, He is deeply committed to forming the person who will be able to care for whatever He decides to place in their hands. I remember a stage in my life when I watched others apparently moving forward faster than I was. I confess there were moments when comparison tried to sow frustration in my heart. I wondered why some doors seemed to open for everyone but me. However, while praying, I understood that I was asking the wrong question. Instead of asking God when the opportunities would arrive, I needed to ask who I needed to become to honor them when they finally appeared. That simple decision completely changed my focus. I stopped obsessing over the future and started working with excellence in the present. Since then, I adopted a discipline that has silently transformed my life. Every day I dedicate time to strengthening a skill, a habit, or a part of my character that is aligned with the person I wish to become. Some days I study, others I train my body, read, write, or invest time in strengthening my relationship with God. There are days when it seems like nothing changes. No one applauds those efforts. No one celebrates them, and often the results are not yet visible, but I learned that true growth almost always happens away from the spotlight. Roots always grow before the fruits do. Over time, I understood that opportunities don't transform people, they simply reveal who they already were before receiving them. If your character is strong, a blessing becomes a platform to serve. If your character is weak, that same blessing can become a burden impossible to sustain. That is why I stopped desperately chasing every door that appeared in front of me. Now my priority is to build a life so solid that when the right opportunity comes, it finds me prepared to respond with wisdom, humility, and gratitude. Today I want to invite you to do the same. Don't waste your energy waiting for the world to change before you decide to grow. Start strengthening what depends on you today. Learn a new skill. Develop a healthy habit. Nurture your spirit and work on your character in silence. Because the future you long for so much won't be sustained by your desires, but by the person you choose to become every day. Because when God finds a prepared heart, opportunities cease to be a coincidence and become the natural consequence of a life built with patience, discipline, and purpose. After understanding that true abundance begins when you become the right person and not when you find the right opportunity, God began to show me another lesson that touched one of the most sensitive areas of my heart. Relationships. For a long time, I lived believing that I had to constantly strive to keep people in my life. I thought that if I stopped writing first, calling, insisting, resolving every conflict, or keeping every conversation alive, I would end up alone. Without realizing it, I confused love with constant effort and loyalty with permanent sacrifice. But a moment came when emotional exhaustion forced me to pause. It was then that I discovered that stopping the chase doesn't drive the right people away. It simply reveals who truly wants to walk with you. I remember a stage when it was always me who sought out the encounter. I was the one who sent the first message, who proposed the meeting, who asked how others were doing, and who tried to sustain bonds that clearly depended on only one person. At first, I convinced myself that this was love. I thought I had to always give a little more, but over time I understood that a relationship where only one invests ends up becoming a burden, not a blessing. True love never needs to be chased desperately. Genuine affection finds ways to draw near because it is born of freedom and not obligation, One day, I decided to do something that seemed very simple, but for me, it represented a huge challenge. I stopped always initiating contact. I didn't do it out of pride or to test anyone. I did it because I needed to discover which relationships walked with me by conviction and which only existed while I held all the weight. I confessed that at first I felt fear. My mind imagined that the silence would mean abandonment. However, as the days went by, something revealing happened. Some people disappeared without even noticing my absence. Others began to look for me, to ask how I was, and to show with actions the interest I previously only hoped for. That process was painful, but also deeply liberating. I understood that many times we insist so much on keeping certain people close that we end up preventing God from making room for those who are truly destined to walk with us. That was when I understood a truth that changed the way I relate to others. Actions always speak more honestly than promises. Words may move us for a moment, but deeds reveal the true intention of the heart. I stopped building expectations on what people said and started to observe, with serenity, what they actually did. That decision gave me a peace that I had sought in the wrong places for years. Today I no longer live chasing affection, attention, or presence. I learned that the most valuable relationships are born when two people decide to walk in the same direction, not when one constantly drags the other. I also understood that letting go doesn't always mean losing. On many occasions, it means protecting your peace and opening space for healthier, deeper connections that are better aligned with the purpose God has for your life. I want to invite you to do an exercise that can transform the way you understand your relationships. For 1 week, stop always initiating contact. Do not act out of resentment or pride. Simply observe. Allow actions to speak louder than your expectations. You will discover that those who truly value your presence will find a way to draw near without you having to chase them. Because the right people will never need you to sacrifice your dignity to stay by your side. They will walk with you because they too have decided to care for the gift of your presence. After understanding that authentic relationships do not need to be chased, but cultivated from freedom and mutual respect, I arrived at one of the lessons that transformed my identity the most. For a long time, I thought I had to constantly demonstrate who I was so that others would recognize my worth. I felt the need to explain my dreams, share every project, justify my decisions, and convince others that I was on the right path. Without realizing it, I was seeking validation disguised as transparency. I wanted people to believe in me before the results could speak for themselves. But one day I realized something that forever changed the way I walk. Inner peace is far more attractive than any attempt to impress. Truly strong people do not live announcing their greatness, they live building it in silence. I remember a stage when I shared almost everything I was about to do. Every new idea needed to be told. Every goal seemed to require someone else's approval. I thought that receiving words of encouragement would strengthen my commitment. However, many times the exact opposite happened. Some people sowed doubt, others projected their own fears, and some simply didn't understand the vision God had placed in my heart. I discovered I was exposing dreams that were still too fragile to withstand the opinions of those not called to build them with me. That was when I understood that not all seeds should be sown before they become trees. God began to teach me that purpose doesn't need publicity to grow, it needs discipline. While I wasted energy explaining where I wanted to go, I stopped investing that same energy in moving one step further. I understood that talking constantly about plans can produce a false sense of progress. True growth occurs when words decrease and actions increase. Character is not developed in speeches, but in the consistency of habits that no one sees. I decided to make a profound change. For a time, I stopped announcing every project, every goal, and every small step forward. I chose to work in silence. At first, it was uncomfortable because I was used to sharing the process, but gradually, I discovered a freedom I had never experienced before. I no longer depended on applause to maintain my motivation. My commitment stopped feeding on the opinions of others and began to strengthen in the conviction that God knew every step I was taking, even when no one else saw it. That inner peace began to reflect in the way I lived. I stopped feeling the need to impress and began to enjoy the privilege of growing. Over time, I understood that the people who truly inspire are not those who speak the loudest, but those whose lives back up every word. They don't need to constantly remind you who they are, because their consistency proves it. That when someone lives with purpose, their results end up speaking with an authority that no speech can match. Serenity, discipline, and integrity produce a presence that doesn't need to grab attention to be respected. Today, I want to propose a challenge that can deeply strengthen your character. Choose an important goal and work on it for the next 30 days without announcing every advance. Let silence protect your focus, and let discipline do the work you once tried to achieve through explanations. You will discover that the less energy you spend on impressing others, the more energy you have to become the person